New this week from Marvel Comics X-Men #1, written by Jed MacKay, art by Ryan Stegman. The discourse around X-Men comics is always surprisingly disparate and strongly opinionated, which I suppose makes sense given the staggering number of comic book fans that exclusively buy X-Men comics, as evidenced by numerous polls by Marvel over the years. So allow me to provide some necessary context for myself going into this review. I am unfortunately not a loyal X fan. In all the years that the X-Men and mutant kind have spent their time politicking and resurrecting on their magical living island Krakoa, I have honestly decried and criticized the narrative direction of the X-Men more than I have praised it. In fact, it wasn't until Kieran Gillen's seminal event series Judgment Day that I felt like I finally understood the motivations of the major mutant cast of characters available right now. But I still found the whole concept of the immortal X-Men as the ironic poster child for the current lack of emotional stakes in Marvel Comics. So with the ending of Krakoa and the disbursement of various mutant groups in the X-Men to the Four Winds and the promise of the X-Men rising from the ashes, I felt like it finally might be a palatable place to gingerly step back into the fan-favorite series. Which I assume is the case for a lot of you. After all, the whole package and alleged new direction of this series is certainly appealing and thoughtful for fans both new and old. Instead of reducing the sheer number of X-Men titles from the Krakoa era, Marvel is continuing to offer a similar variety of X titles, each with distinct teams from various exciting writer and artist collaborations. The hope being assuredly that fans will be encouraged to pick up the new X-Men title featuring their fan-favorite character and not feel like their fandom isn't being represented in the modern X-Men. Jed MacKay and Ryan Stegman are just the first new X-Men team, soon to be followed by Gail Simone with Uncanny X-Men, featuring a more classic team of Rogue, Gambit, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Jubilee. Then X-Factor by Mark Russell, featuring Angel, Havoc, Frenzy, Feral, and Pyro. Exceptional X-Men by Eve L. Ewing, featuring Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde, and some new X-Men characters. And a new solo Wolverine title from Jonathan Hickman and Greg Capullo. MacKay's iteration of the X-Men team features Beast, Magneto, Cyclops, Juggernaut, Magic, Kid Omega, Temper, Psylocke, Zorn, and a few scattered others seeking a refuge and to rebuild a semblance of a home for mutant kind in the distant Alaskan town of Merle. Now, as an admittedly tertiary X-Men fan, I am not as familiar with some of these X-Men characters as I should be, which I think is both a hindrance and a draw to X-Men books, the sheer backlog of lore for seemingly every single character, especially coming off of the dauntingly literary era of Krakoa. Look at how many books this is. Jesus Christ. However, as the big, bold, no additional flavor text necessary, brand new X-Men flagship series, I have faith that the series will perform the dual role of both elevating and elucidating characters while the series progresses, as is the magic of superhero comic book making. Let's dive into issue #1 now, which means spoilers ahead. Our story begins with the local chief of police arriving at the recently occupied X-Men stronghold for a scheduled meeting with Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, aka the leader of the X-Men, but is instead greeted by Beast, which I think we can all agree is understandably an upsetting sight. However, Hank McCoy's charm soon wins the startled chief over as he gives her a tour of the facility. Meanwhile, we cut to Cyclops and his new team as they assault a compound alleged to be holding mutants for experimentation by the remnants of the sinister organization Orchis, rebranded now as Fourth School. Once inside the compound, the team discovers Wolverine, who has been captured by the organization and harvested for his regrowing genetic material as they torture him. And that's it. That's the story. So thank you so much for watching, and remember to support. No. But seriously, if I have a major gripe with this pivotal first issue, it's that the scope of the story seems too broad to handle such a large cast of characters in such a short format. Which, on the subject of characterization, I know I may not be the most well-versed X-Men fan. I can't help but feel like some of the characters in this issue have been relegated to archetypes to fit the team as opposed to their complex, storied selves. Specifically, I'm referring to Magic and Juggernaut, who kind of feel like afterthoughts in this issue when arguably they are the strongest members of the team. Also, I think that I think a lot of people returning to the X-Men need some catching up on the lore with Juggernaut, because the last time I checked, he worshipped the god of pain to get his powers, so that doesn't seem heroic. And I think that the marginalization of the more recognizable legacy characters in this issue speaks to my disconnect with the story. Having instead to focus on expositionary dialogue from unfamiliar, lesser-known characters that does them a disservice in the process. For instance, I know enough about modern X-Men to know that Kid Omega's whole thing is that he is annoying, overbearing, and socially awkward. So why make him the most vocal member of the team in this new issue that's supposed to attract new readership? I will say, though, that this first issue does provide me some faith in the new direction for this new X-Men title, as I'm familiar with MacKay's unfolding or slow burn approach to superhero storytelling as evidenced in his more recent titles like Doctor Strange and Moon Knight. However, I think a large portion of that faith and interest lies in the previous history and intrigue of the characters present in this issue, which can only last so long. When we finally get to Wolverine's inclusion in the story, with an admittedly confusing splash page that, due to coloration, makes him look like Beast, especially because on the previous page, Beast was featured, the story does develop a new sense of grit, but I just wish it wasn't confusing. But I'm imagining that the conversation about that specific page went a little something like this. Hey, Jed MacKay, it's me, Marvel. We have to talk to you about this page. So, are you listening? Okay, so this page is pretty graphic. So if you're going to include this in the story, then we're probably going to have to get a new rating on it, and we really don't want to do that. Do you really want to do that for the X-Men #1? You want to have like an NC-17 rating? I'm not changing it. Okay, yeah. We'll just color it weird or something. Sorry, Jed. Sorry. However, stemming from this scene, I did really enjoy Logan's sentiment expressed to Scott about the sorry state of the new mutant kind. It's a genuinely heartbreaking scene that palatably expresses the magnitude of the weight of change that I think MacKay is trying to impress upon new readers in this first issue. The fact that Wolverine, of all people having lived so many lives, is stepping away from any and all responsibility and leadership is indicative of how far the mutants have fallen without a hand to pick them back up. Nevertheless, this shaky, unenviable, vacillating ground is inherently not much for this new X-Men to stand on, contributing to making this issue feel more like an issue 0 than an issue #1. This is evidenced most glaringly in this issue's lack of a centralized villain, opting instead to make an encompassing commentary on the state of world affairs and characters' dogmatic beliefs, carrying them forward for the better or for the worse. Where we find Beast's blind optimism, we have the blunt balancing rod of Magneto's vehement supremacist philosophy. As Wolverine turns his back on the past and embraces change, Scott struggles to hold on to the only values he's ever known, the values that he's learned through the actions of the X-Men. As the world primitively questions whether or not mutants should be allowed back into society, the scientific Fourth World Organization pursues even greater evolution, combining elements of machine, man, and mutant. In other words, irony and dissatisfaction are the most evident villains presented in this issue. While X-Men #1 may not be flashy or perfect, I do find value in the earnest ideas that MacKay is bringing to the table, and will stick around in the hopes that he can evolve them into something more dynamic, character-driven, and action-oriented. This is a team of diverse, unique, beloved characters that I want to be invested in and discover again in bold, new environs. Remember to support your local comic book stores and grab X-Men #1 on shelves now. With a disclaimer that I feel like I would be doing you a disservice not to mention, this issue is $6. Really disappointing. I'm a really big Ryan Stegman fan, and I saw on Twitter when this project was announced that he said he was experimenting with a new style for the X-Men, and I'm still trying to decide if I like it or not, but I mean, the guy is clearly one of the great artists of our time. It's like 1 degree more cartoony than his regular art style. I do love the way that he renders his characters as being more realistic and muscly. This is that bizarre page in question. I had to do a double take a couple times. I was like, what is going on? What is in that bucket? I really appreciate MacKay's focus on Cyclops and Beast in this issue. I feel like he did their characters justice. I'd love to know in the comments what your favorite X-Men issues are, or story arcs. What are the essential stories in the X-Men canon? Let me know.